I'm Anthony Epps, and I am the chair of this year's African American Men of Westchester's virtual Brotherhood event. Today, our event will focus on the issue that has become top of mind for all categories of employers, current and future employees, as well as vendors nationwide. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, is a topic that 10 years ago didn't exist to any great extent. But today, there are a variety of levels of managers who are engaged to ensure that organizations provide equal opportunities to employment for advancement to all. AAMW has partnered with the Westchester Business Council to provide this panel discussion, DEI, Views from the Top. And we are honored to have Dr. Marsha Gordon, President and CEO of the Business Council, to welcome you.
I'm Dr. Marsha Gordon, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Business Council of Westchester. For the past 20 years, the Business Council and the African American Men of Westchester have enjoyed an enduring partnership that served our mutual interest of leveraging opportunities to improve the lives of people of Westchester County. To that end, over the past 20 years, our organizations have co-sponsored the Brotherhood Breakfast, a cornerstone event that exposes people from multiple disciplines to economic challenges specifically facing Westchester County. It uncovers to interested parties in business and to our youth the topics that are germane to county residents in the area of financial opportunity. The most recent topics were immigration reform, pros and cons for Westchester's economy, investing in a STEM literate workforce, job creation and a thriving local economy, and navigating the COVID-19 job market. The Brotherhood Breakfast has traditionally been held as an in-person gathering at a venue with expert panelists who advise on the specific topic. However, in consideration of the pandemic, last year's event, Navigating COVID-19 Job Market, was discussed virtually. And we are replicating that process this year to deliver information on this year's topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion, lessons from the top. We thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to providing you high-value programs in the future.
Hello, I'm Eric Eller, President of the African American Men of Westchester. I also want to welcome you to this year's Brotherhood event, a panel discussion that addresses issues that we, as men of color, consider to be the utmost of importance: diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Over the past 23 years, the Brotherhood Breakfast has been attended by more than 3,000 people representing youth, business, government, and community organizations. The breakfast is designed to exchange ideas on economic development within Westchester County, and it celebrates the economic diversity that makes Westchester County New York State's golden apple. As was done last year, this year's affair will not be an in-person gathering, but a virtual event in deference to the pandemic. Each year, the Brotherhood event, AAMW, and the Business Council of Westchester recognize someone who has emulated our late brother, Hal Fitzpatrick. In addition to his dedication to family, Hal, as we called him, consistently focused significant efforts on service to the community. Therefore, we've created an award in his memory. To that end, I'm honored to present this year's Hal Fitzpatrick Community Service Award to Lauren Zaney, Executive Director at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. Early in her career, Lauren served as a Senior Program Manager and Diversity Recruiter with Morgan Stanley's Wealth Management Division. Afterwards, she was appointed Chief Operating Officer for the Diversity and Inclusion Team. Lauren played a major role in the creation and implementation of the company's diversity and inclusion initiatives. Today, her role includes driving long-term business priorities through essential partnerships and program development. She's the head of the National Sponsorship and Program and Wealth Management Diversity and Inclusion. She is part of the Global Sports and Entertainment Group and Segment Sales and Engagement Team. She partners closely with the National Diversity and Inclusion Council on strategy implementation. She supports the division's field and home office divisions to ensure appropriate representation and consistent messaging. And she oversees the Wealth Management, Women in Wealth, and Multicultural Employee Network. This is a tremendous body of work that has been achieved in a very few years, and both Morgan Stanley and our community are blessed to have her. Please join me in congratulating Lauren Zaney, this year's recipient of the Harold Fitzpatrick Community Service Award.
I am truly humbled to receive the Harold Fitzpatrick Community Service Award. Thank you to the African American Men of Westchester for your tireless support and commitment to building a community where all can thrive. When I left Jamaica to go to school in the Northeast, I had no idea where my path would lead. And it truly was because of my community. My friends, my family, my teachers, mentors, sponsors, who helped guide me to where I am today. I learned early on the importance of sending the elevator back down. This is a journey of collaboration, and so many took a chance on me. And it's incumbent upon all of us to help those around us by doing the same for others. Having the opportunity to host the African American Men of Westchester's Business Skills Competition for 6 years and running has been an incredibly rewarding experience. And it has become somewhat of a tradition at Morgan Stanley, and one our internal community looks forward to every year. I'd be remiss if I did not recognize my former colleague, Terry Williams, who brought this opportunity to us over 6 years ago. His passion and love for the organization and his community is truly what led us to this place. I also want to recognize Namita Kameth, who has been a key partner in curating this event for several years. We could not have done it without her. To Morgan Stanley for their ongoing support of the African American Men of Westchester and the Business Skills Competition. And last, but certainly not least, to Bernie Toms, Lou Von Brown, Anthony Epps, and the entire organization for your partnership and friendship. This has been an incredibly rewarding journey, and I look forward to what's ahead. Thank you all again.
Our moderator today will be Julian Phillips. Julian is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, political analyst, author, motivational speaker, and celebrity chef. He can currently be seen on his 2 YouTube channels, On Point with Julian Phillips, a weekly political and current events show, and Chilling in the Kitchen with Julian Phillips, where he shares his culinary skills. Julian has written 2 spiritually based books, Discovering Your Hidden Power, Unleashing the Power of Words with Reverend Dr. A.R. Bernard, and his soon-to-be published Empirical Evidence, 16 short stories on the presence of God. He began his career as a desk assistant at ABC Radio Network News, and later served as a reporter covering breaking news and manager of community relations at MSNBC and NBC TV. He served as a political analyst, making appearances on MSNBC and CW News at 10, hosting their weekly community and public service affair program, Best Talk. His stellar work on that program earned him the New York State Associated Press Broadcasters Award. In addition, he received the Edwin R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Journalism. Please welcome my friend, Julian Phillips.
Welcome to the African American Men of Westchester's panel discussion here on diversity. My name is Julian Phillips. I'm a 3-time Emmy Award winner and a motivational speaker as well, amongst a lot of other things. More importantly, right now, the conversation is focusing squarely on diversity. You know, this really couldn't come at a better time because we have just witnessed recently Brian Flores from the Miami Dolphins filing a class action lawsuit against the NFL in regards to discrimination. And we know right now, even though the NFL says that this lawsuit has no merit, the fact of the matter is, out of all the 32 teams in the NFL, there's only one black head coach. His record as with the NFL Miami Dolphins, he won 8 of his last 9 games. It's systemic in terms of how this goes on, and a lot more will come out. But diversity has always been an issue for decades in this country, perhaps even longer than that. But the focus has been on it more so recently, and therefore there's been inclusion of people of color in positions of management that have taken on diversity roles. What does diversity mean? Where are we with it? Have we made any headway in dealing with diversity and inclusion in corporate America and other areas where employment is needed for people of color? We're going to investigate that, and we have a all-star panel here with us. We've introduced Laura Zadie earlier today, our honoree, and we also have with us Dean Akbar. He's a Senior Director of Human Resources and Organizational Development at White Plains Hospital. He spent the last 14 years working in HR, talent development, and talent management. Dean currently oversees several areas, including employee onboarding, talent management, and mobility, employee training and development, and employee engagement and organizational development. That's a mouthful. Dean has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Morgan State and a master's degree in organizational psychology from Hofstra University. And we also have with us Cindy Porter. She is the Vice President of Student Affairs and Chief Diversity Officer at Manhattanville College. Cindy serves as member of College President's Cabinet and participates in institution-wide planning. She provides executive leadership, strategic planning, and oversight in multiple areas for the Division of Student Affairs. More recently, Cindy has developed and delivered educational opportunities for the Manhattanville community related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Cindy's education is also very wide and vast. She has a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Morgan State University as well. Morgan State grads here. What's going on here? A master's degree in counseling and higher education from Illinois State University, and a doctorate from Johnson & Wales University in educational leadership. I want to welcome you too. And you know, Cindy, I want to start with you in terms of diversity. I'd like to give us a definition of what you feel diversity actually means.
Absolutely. Diversity talks about differences and representation of differences. In many ways, diversity looks at numbers. Who's in the room? Who's at the table? So when we're speaking about diversity, we're looking at representation across the board.
You know, you deal with inclusion. Some people think it's just a Band-Aid on a wound that it's bigger than what it really can cover. As you have been dealing with trying to get more people of color, include more people in your organization, what kind of roadblocks have you come up with, or come up against, I should say?
I would say that maybe some of the roadblocks are, I think there's so much that needs to be done and has to be done in some organizations. I think, from my perspective and where I started, my organization and maybe 3 years ago is really getting off the ground. And I think that it's really important to get buy-in from leadership. And so that can either propel your success and your strategy, or that can hinder you in terms of accomplishing what you want in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Lauren, I want to ask you a question on this in terms of the kinds of jobs that are afforded to people of color with this whole thing. I mean, decades ago, affirmative action was those 2 words were the big words. I found that back then, especially in the 70s and 80s, that usually the jobs afforded to people of color were human resources, community relations. Are we seeing more executives now being placed in positions and I don't want to of greater significance in the sense of being able to direct the corporate executives, the corporation in areas that they normally were not afforded?
Absolutely. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done in that space, but you're seeing a lot more intentionality than we have in the past around what needs to happen to ensure that those steps are taking place. In other words, if you're looking at your employees, right, we've seen this sort of concerted effort across the board, across industries, where companies are really taking heed to the importance of hiring diverse talent. Along that same vein, it's once your employees have started their career, they're in the seat, then what? Right? Ensuring that you're providing those opportunities for growth that will get them to that management, that C-suite level is paramount. But we are starting to see certainly an increase, nowhere where it needs to be, but we are starting to see certainly more representation at the top.
Good point. But I think that the question for a lot of people who will be viewing this is that we're seeing what's happening in the NFL. Also, most recently, we're witnessing what's going on at CNN, the demise of Jeff Zucker, and the push now by the National Association of Black Journalists to get more executives in positions of power there. Through a lot of pressure, apparently they've made some strides there, but they still have a long way to go. Journalism is one thing, but we still see this where there are a lack or a paucity of Black executives or people of color in high positions. I guess the question is, we have diversity executives, like many of you. What else does it take to get corporations to do what I would consider, and what many people would consider, the right thing? Cindy, I want to start with you on that.
Oh, absolutely. So we've talked about diversity. I'm going to add in the other piece, which is equally as important, and that's inclusion. Part of what corporations have to do is to really assess their environment to see if it's the type of environment that is looking to support a diverse population of individuals. What does that take? When you look at corporations, it's more than just the representation. It's making the representation matter, right? And part of making that representation matter is fostering the type of climate that folks of color want to work in and that they can succeed in. Part of that, as we're having this broad conversation, also talks about, has us thinking about how do we create that climate? What needs to happen at the executive level for those employees to be attracted and to be retained?
Well, Cindy, I want to follow up with you on that. Making the environment attractive to them and making it a workable workforce, so to speak. Are we that different? You talk about the human condition and human race. Black people, they like things and dislike things just like anybody else does. Mm-hmm. Why is it so difficult to have people who are talented, okay, who have the same qualifications as somebody who's white? Why would it be more difficult to include them, to get them into a working environment when most people have to really deal with the same kinds of challenges? What's so different about us?
Part of that difference is lived experiences. Our lived experiences may not be the same. And as you look at coming into an environment, particularly if you're looking at making an inclusive environment, part of that means taking a step back from the management level, understanding one's own unconscious biases, because we all have them. And that can weave itself into an organization unknowingly. And so taking stock of that as an individual, as a manager, as an executive, plays into how individuals might experience the workplace. And one of the things I'm going to say about unconscious bias is it's just that. Sometimes it's not always intentional, but sometimes as you think about the different lived experiences, that means that sometimes things are not necessarily equal in order to create an equitable environment.
I'm going to call this the rib factor, and I'll tell you why. I had a restaurant. It was a fusion of Cajun, Southern Italian, and Hell's Kitchen. And I would often mention my cuisine to some of my white friends. I would tell them that I came up with this thing called Black and Wings, which won the best wings in New York State back in 2018. But every time I mentioned Black and Wings and Cajun, a number of them would always come, oh, well, you're making ribs? And I'm saying, ribs? No, I said Cajun. It seems like, there are a lot of people who are white that want to compartmentalize our humanity, that they're comfortable with looking at us in a certain hue and not wanting to have us go out of that box. And this comes to you, Dean. You're the psychological expert here. What is it about people who may be culturally different that keeps them in a state of mind where they don't want to see another group, another people outside of that box that they're so comfortable with? And how do you get beyond that in terms of a working environment, a viable working environment in a corporate setting?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's natural, right? So we want to be a part of groups and discussions that we are familiar with. So there's this natural inclination to want to avoid anything that's different. And I think that a lot of, some of the challenges that we have in organizations with regards to diversity stems from, that avoidance. And in terms of what we can do is, I think it's really important to embrace diversity, embrace differences, understand the power or the impact of having a diverse work group, right? So there's a tons of research that says, that organizations, that teams who are more diverse have more successful outcomes. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they get along better. And actually, what they see in the research is that there's a lot of conflict in diverse teams, right? But it leads to innovation and creativity and better outcomes. And so I think as an organization or as an individual, if we can understand the benefits of having a diverse perspective, having a diverse team, and learning from people and individuals who are not like us, I think that's a great starting point in terms of creating changes, understanding the benefit of diversity.
But the problem that I think a number of people see, including myself, if we're looking at society from our own worldview and our lens, is that outside of corporate America, outside of places that we work, we still live in a segregated society. I live in Nassau County, Long Island. Nassau County was, I don't know if it still is, with the last census, the most segregated county in the United States. All right, and here, this is the good old Northeast. So when people are living separately and they don't interact with anybody outside of them being in the workplace together, how do you develop an attitude and a mindset for people that perhaps don't really have any interaction with people of color, probably maybe don't even really care about them that much? How do you get them to change their mindset to understand the importance of diversity in corporate America? Lauren, I want you to start off with that and answer that question for me.
Yeah, it's a great question. Excuse me. And I go back to a comment that Dr. Porter had made before around unconscious biases. We did this exercise across the board about a year or so ago, and one of the exercises entailed writing down 10 people in your network, right? 10 people that you see on the weekends, maybe you went to school with, maybe in your work circle. And what was so surprising, for me at least, is how surprised everyone else was that their network looked just like them. And so honestly, I feel it comes back to intentionality, right? It is intentionally saying, my network looks just like I do, and I didn't even realize it. I didn't even think about it. So now I need to go out and ensure that I am either collaborating with someone on a project who may think differently than I do, or in my community, or where my kids go to school. But I do think that the resources are out there. One of the most frustrating things I think all of us can attest to is, well, teach me about diversity. What am I missing? What can I do? Google is a real thing, and there are a lot of resources out there that you can teach yourself, right, around the importance not only of diversity, but equity and inclusion. So my short answer to that is intentionality. It's taking a deep look in terms of, your network, your beliefs, where they may have come from, where they may have stemmed from, and putting real action into place to change that.
That's key. I remember several years ago, my wife, we were vacationing on Martha's Vineyard, and it was a rainy day. There was a white couple we befriended over in Oak Bluffs, and we decided to go to the movies. And the movie was My Big Fat Greek Wedding. We got into the movie theater, and there were a number of people in there at the time. And we're going through all the nuances of this movie and the things that were going on in these Greek families. And you could hear people talking, whispering, wow, that sounds just like my family. Or, that sounds like my family. Culturally, there are differences amongst human beings. But basically, there are a lot of things that we can all say that, look, we deal with the same kinds of things, the same characteristics, the same feelings. The question becomes what you're talking about, Lauren. How do you get people to understand? I'm going somewhere with this because I think I have an answer, at least, because we're in Black History Month now. How do you get people to understand that, yes, we have differences culturally. We can celebrate those differences. But in many aspects of our human condition, we are the same. Cindy, can you pick this up here on this, please?
Oh, sure. It starts with conversations. It starts in elementary school. It starts as we progress through our education and being in these environments where we have conversations. Sometimes, particularly in the workplace, we can provide opportunities for groups of people to work together on projects so that you're getting that different perspective. And in the workplace, just as in the school system, part of those intentional conversations, if you will, can just be about being a human being. It's not always about the Black experience. It's about storytelling and sharing our stories with one another and creating spaces for that to happen. Because it's through that storytelling that suddenly you're going to say, oh my gosh, I had a similar situation that happened with my family. What, you like this too? And then you build from those commonalities. And if you're able to create this space where this communication can happen, and if you can create a space where this communication can happen and there's a sense of trust, you can move on to deeper issues and have different kinds of conversations. But that's where it starts. That intentionality that you're talking about, being able to put those groups in some way together to begin those conversations. I think that's a place to start.
I want to unpack this a little further. I want to break this down, if I can, to what I would call back in the ghetto vernacular, real nitty gritty. Education, to me, is perhaps the most important thing prior to getting into corporate America. What do I mean by that? Here we are in Black History Month, all right? And what do we normally see in Black History Month? We see athletes. We see entertainers. We even see aspects of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King and stuff like that. Here's the thing. Most white people don't care about Black History Month because the things that they show in Black History Month have no impact on them. So what about somebody for Black History Month like John Burr? Who's John Burr? Well, you mow your lawn every day, don't you? Or you get somebody to mow it. Well, he was an inventor, and he helped get the rotary blade for lawn mowers together. He was one of the inventors of the lawn mower. there are so many things. There are so many John Burrs out there. There are so many Phyllis Wheatleys out there that have made life easier, everyday things. And once folks that don't look like us understand, oh, well, you know, I had a heart transplant. Thank God for Dr. Daniel Hill Williams, who had the first open heart transplant in the world. Or I had a transfusion. What about Dr. Charles Drew? You know, when these folks start hearing about those things, they can understand that they are not the only ones that contributed to the betterment of our society here in this country or the world at large. But what happens is you don't hear these things. They're not promoted. So therefore, the things that are normally promoted at Black History Month are things that white folks really, they don't care about. How do we start to get people involved on a grassroots level before they reach corporate America, ladies and gentlemen, to be educated? So therefore, perhaps they come to work and they may have a different persona and view on how they think and look at us, knowing that we have helped contribute to this society as much, and perhaps in many instances, more than they have. Dean, I want you to answer this question, Mr. Psychologist.
So if I had to answer that, I would say that maybe, you know, some good starting places to have that dialogue and start that education before we get to corporate America is I think a lot of it starts at home and the conversations that you're having there. And so the good and the bad, when you get to corporate America or when you get to adulthood, starts with what was reinforced at home. And so I think it's really important what you're doing there. And as well, I would say the second piece is probably education in our education system to make sure that we are educating our youth about the different contributions from various cultures and individuals from various backgrounds. So I think those are two really good starting points.
Okay, Dean, it sounds good, and I'm not minimizing what you're saying here, but we're talking about diversity and inclusion in corporate America in the workplace, but also diversity in terms of our education. Lauren Zadie, you know as well as I know that there are people that don't want inclusion. They don't want critical race theory. They don't want to have people learn about slavery, the importance of it, and how we are still dealing with the after effects of that. Now, so the question becomes, for people like you folks, all three of you that have to deal with trying to get diversity in the workplace, inclusion and empowerment, how do you do it when you come up against a roadblock like this, where you have legislators, you have lawmakers that really simply don't want it? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, look, there are things within our control and there are things that aren't. One of the ways that I found that we have been able to, and I would argue that after the murder of George Floyd, we started to see much more of this taking place where we could have real provocative conversations where we created those safe spaces, but also through we have several employee networking groups. And we have sort of taken it upon ourselves as a broader team to take on the role as educator. So we're going to have a conversation to talk about a number of different things. We had a Lomo Juo, so you want to talk about race. We had, conversations around critical race theory. We had conversations that I think this current environment has provided a platform to have those conversations, not only to educate, but to draw in our allies, right? Because at the end of the day, there are individuals who may look different from us, who aren't intending to be offensive or racist, right? I think it's very easy for us to say, they made a comment to me, they must be racist, right? Much of this, what I have found, is unintentional. And so taking a stance in terms of how you as an individual can change a trajectory is paramount, is where it starts. I think, and not to oversimplify the conversation, but I think about my daughter. She's 6. She has long curly hair and she hates her hair, right? All the books she reads, all the Disney movies she watches, right? They all have straight, long, blonde hair. And I had to take it into my own hands to buy her the books that had characters that looked like her, to buy the doll that looked like her, right? So I think each of us have an opportunity to play a role here. And that's truly where it starts.
Interesting you mentioned that. I remember, I'm a little bit older than you. I say maybe just a little bit. But I remember it was Jet magazine. It was either Jet or Ebony magazine, and they had an ad in there of a little young Black child looking into a mirror. And the image that was reflected back to him was not him himself. If I remember correctly, I think it was Superman. And Superman was white. And he looked at that image and, it presented this picture of, we don't have many images of ourselves, our positive self images that we can go to. So what you're talking about is true. But let me just take this. We're going to get back to corporate America in a second, but we're talking about empowerment and how we look at ourselves and how other people look at us. Let's go back to our government. Right now, we're talking about critical race theory. I think that, first of all, that's really not being taught in schools. I think the name, the connotation of it, can be negative for folks who don't look like us. I think it's something that's really negative. No, I think the name is wrong. That's another issue. But we have a system of laws in here, and we have a government that's put in place that can enact and change the laws, change how children are educated. On the state and local levels, particularly, there's a lot of resistance to change in terms of how we educate our kids, especially when it comes to slavery. Some people just don't want to hear about this. We don't want to inflame or hurt or incite anybody. So I guess the question is, when you want things changed on a level where lawmakers have to be involved, I'm going to throw this question out to each of you. You can answer it. What do you think needs to be done to get our lawmakers to change how we educate our kids? What is included in the textbooks? We're here in 2022. And, we still have a lot of people in this country that believe that Columbus discovered America. And we have governors that promote this philosophy. One here that used to be in New York. How do we get our lawmakers to understand that, look, we can't have lip service anymore. You got to change. We've got to include, it can't be just Black History Month. How do we get our lawmakers to make this kind of change? Cindy, I want to start with you. Lauren, you can follow up, and Dean, I'll have you anchor this for us. Cindy?
So I'm smiling because my first response is that we may need to change some of our lawmakers and make sure that our lawmakers are representing us and are representing the population. Listen, we're seeing that the demographics of America are changing. And because they are changing and white are becoming a smaller percentage of our overall population, people of color are becoming that larger percentage, there's that sense that we need to hold on, right? We need to hold on to what we've got. We got to hold on to this power and what that means. We as people of color have an opportunity to have our voices be heard. And again, the more we want and the more we work to get those voices heard, we're seeing that some lawmakers are trying to see how can we stop this from happening? How can we stop this change from happening? But change is inevitable, right? At all levels. And part of that is we have to keep pushing the agenda. And that is tiring. And I see this happening with not just my generation, But the next generation, those voices have to be heard. And we're seeing more diversity. And quite frankly, George Floyd, everything that happened in 2019, 2020, it's creating that spark. We see it on many college campuses. They're saying, we are going to hold you accountable, not just for lip service, but for change. And just as we see it on college campuses, we're seeing it across the country, and we have to see more of that. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, Lauren.
I couldn't agree more. And I think to perhaps take it a step further is the education piece is so key.
Mm-hmm.
But even educating our community around what government looks like, right? When to vote, who am I voting for? What am I voting for? I would argue that we don't do a good enough job in terms of how we are educating our communities around how to affect change. And you're absolutely right. It is tiring. It is exhausting. But if we don't continue to push the agenda, right? Definition of insanity. But that education piece in terms of encouraging everyone to get out there and vote for what it is that you believe, as tiring and as exhausting as it is. I think we all know we put a lot of emphasis on the presidential election, right? But we don't talk about anything else. And so I think that is a large part of how we can affect and implement change.
Absolutely. And politics is indeed local, for sure. Dean, you can chip in.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what was shared by Dr. Porter and Lauren, and Dr. Porter said that, we have an opportunity to have our voices heard, but I think there's an obligation, right? And so if we want to affect change, we have to kind of do those actions that will lead to those change. And again, if if the government and legislators aren't representing our voices, to Lauren's point, I think it's really important that we're educating our youth and everyone, about the power of voting. I can't tell you that. I can tell you that I have, individuals that I know that say to me that, there's, it's no need to vote, right? My vote doesn't count. And that goes back to just educating what it means to vote and the power that has.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because, there's still contention among some folks over the 2020 presidential election. And, I hear so many people say, and, I'm a political advisor to both parties. So I know the flaws in both parties. And I hear people out in the street and I talk to them. There's this one man, he's a Trump supporter. And he says, well, I'm not voting anymore, and I hear this amongst Black people. Here's where I'm going with this. There was just this one tape recording that took place between Donald Trump and Brad Raffensperger in the state of Georgia, the Secretary of State down there. And Donald Trump says, look, you need to find me 11,780 votes. But he was really talking about that one extra vote that would get him over. One vote. I think it's important for people to understand and know the importance of the one vote. And so many people think, oh, well, look, my vote doesn't count. And this spans race, culture. New York City is the last election, the mayoral election. Only 23 to 26% of registered voters actually voted. Mm-hmm. The most in recent history, the presidential election, was the last one where 62% voted. And prior to that, it was 2008, it was 57%. That was Barack Obama. But when you think about those numbers, even 62%, you've got 38%, 40% more people that are not voting. Mm-hmm. And then you get and still people, once things happen, everybody's yelling and screaming and carrying on. But did you vote? Do you take part in your local town hall meetings? Do you go to visit? And white, black? No, nobody does. But yet and still, if things are not going their way, people are complaining. I guess the question becomes, how do we get people to fully understand the importance of the vote? Because there's just so much apathy out there. Cindy, help me out here.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's not an easy answer. One of the things that Lauren said that I agree so much with is that many of us will show up when it's the presidential election, but we've got to pay attention to what's happening in our own districts, what's happening in our neighborhoods. And I see a lot of, when my children were in school, I saw a lot of participation of parents, but there were gaps. Where were the young voters, the 20-somethings that had the ability to influence, that set and feel very frustrated about the direction that things are going? So where do you start? How do you get those? How do you move those folks? I think part of it is bringing more to everyone's attention as to what the issues are. The 20-somethings are more in tune to the social media. They're more in tune to what's happening on the Twitter news feeds, as opposed to sitting and watching the evening news or newspapers, or a thing of the past for this up and coming generation. So how do we get those voices out there? I think we have to attack it from every potential level, every potential venue that we can get this word out about how important this is. How important this is 12 months of the year, not certainly just during Black History Month.
Yeah,
as a place to start.
Absolutely. It's funny, people do get tired. We all get tired. I remember, when I first became a street reporter for WNBC back in, before Noah built his ark. And I was telling a friend of mine, I said, God, I'm glad I got to this point, but I'm tired now. And this Earl Green was just, Julian, you don't have time to be tired. You just, you've got to suck it up and get it together. And we don't. I want to bring this back down. We're going to close this. I mean, we could go on forever about this, but I want to close this out with a question I want to ask all of you. When it comes to this mountain that we face in 2022, we're still dealing with, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is still race. There are people in this country that don't want to deal with it. We've had affirmative action, we've had the civil rights movement, but yet and still, as far as we have gone, and there has been a lot of progress. I mean, I can see where my parents were and where I am now. There's been a lot of progress, but we have so far to go. What are the things that each of you would like to see in your respective roles where you work, that you really think will be the catalyst for change for the better, for more progress? Lauren, I want to start with you.
Progress is slow. Progress is definitely slow. If I think about when I initially started at Morgan Stanley, fast forward 10 years, I was part of a diversity and inclusion team of 3. And now we are 25 strong. And I mention that only because to see the evolution of this, what I would like to see happen is, and I keep using this word, but I firmly believe that it comes down to intention. It's one thing to say, we're going to partner with all of these organizations, we're going to hire by the hundreds. But then once you have these individuals in the door, how are you creating a pathway? What are you doing to develop these employees, these individuals? And at the end of the day, we want to work in a culture, in an organization, in a company that speaks for itself, right? Where you don't have to be, banging down the door. You don't have to be, creating marketing collateral and showing up and not walking the talk, right? You want to have a culture of inclusion, of belonging, where people are just automatically drawn to you because they see themselves there. So the long answer to your question is, I would like to see more intentionality across the board in terms of how we hire, how we develop, how we promote, how we retain our diverse employees.
That's well said. Dean, I want you to go ahead, and Cindy, I want you to anchor this, and we can move on. Dean?
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that, and I think that's a really important word, intentionality, and in terms of our efforts. And I think what I would like to see, is to have that representation, not just in workforce, but that inclusion in decision making in most organizations. And I think that starts with making sure that your workforce is representative of your community, your market base, and what we've done really well. And again, even actually to take it a step back, to get to intentionality, I think that you have to have the right people at the table, right? It can't just be, a group of employees who really champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has to start with leadership. And that's one of the things that was really important for us. And so when I started, we didn't have much of a diversity, equity, or inclusion initiative or committee. But we thought that it was really important that in order to start, we had to have buy-in from our top leadership. And in our task force, we had to have representation from our executive team, as well as we had members from the board who were on, in those discussions. And I think that's how you get to meaningful change. And so going back to representation, and we, one thing that we have implemented is looking at our workforce data and demographic data to make sure it's reflective. And a lot of organizations maybe have this practice in place and look at it as a whole. And I don't think it stops there. It's good to have your entire talent pool reflective of the community and the market base. But I think it's also important to take it a step further to make sure that those in leadership are also, or the makeup of leadership is also as diverse as the community and as the larger talent pool. So I would say that to continue to have buy-in from those who have power, and to continue to make sure that there's diversity across the board.
The distinguished Dr. Porter, you have the last word.
Lauren, Dean, I agree with everything that you two have said. I'm going to add in one last element, and that is accountability. Without that accountability, that helps you to continue to move forward, you're going to have starts and you're going to have stops. Progress is slow, Lauren. I work in higher education, and you would think in higher ed, this is our mantra, access for everyone. But creating those environments where students, diversity can thrive, not just at the student body, but throughout the organization, is so important. I am so proud to work at an institution where I do that has had this uneven history of stops and starts, because we've gotten to a place where now we're talking about accountability. Accountability means more than just looking at the diversity of the population, but it's looking at things through an equity-minded framework, looking at policies, looking at systems, looking at your procedures to really ensure that this is something that is being infused throughout the organization. And without that accountability, sure, anyone can talk that talk, but it's doing the work that matters.
Absolutely. The three things I've gotten out of this, the two of them from the three of you, which has just been a great conversation. Of course, Dr. Porter talks about accountability, and both Dean and Lauren, you talk about intentionality. It's so key. And I also would like to add one word in there: transparency.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important. Look, we've kind of waltzed around the world here. We've gone back to civil rights, and we've talked about education and what legislators and lawmakers should do, and what's going on in corporate America now and what needs to be changed. I think this was a great conversation, and I would urge everybody to really think about what's been said here by our experts today. This has been wonderful. We do have a long way to go, but thank God we have people like you, the three of you that are at the forefront of making a positive change with a relentless drive for progress. I want to thank Dean Akbar, Cindy Porter, and Lauren Zadie for being a part of this great program. And for me, I'm just glad that the African American Men of Westchester have let me moderate a second panel. And I hope these discussions go on beyond Black History Month. Thank all of you for being a part of this. I want to thank once again the African American Men of Westchester. And I believe Anthony Epps will be providing closing remarks. Thank you once again.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. As a group of men who have had a variety of experiences with issues of fairness, good and not so good, the members of the African American Men of Westchester feel that effective DEI efforts are only those that are woven into the fabric of an organization. It's not about establishing senior DEI management positions. It's not about meeting numerical targets. And it's not about latching on to DEI as a buzzword or the latest hot topic. It's about the understanding that talent exists among classes of people who have been denied opportunities in the past, and realization that leveraging that talent will yield stronger and more profitable organizations. We at the African American Men of Westchester thank our panelists, viewers, and sponsors for participating in and contributing to this event. We promise to continue delivering content that is of considerable relevance to each of you going forward. Again, thank you, and let's make a difference.